Do you know what happens when a family decides that outsiders are the enemy? When bloodlines become so tangled that children are born as echoes of their ancestors, when entire communities vanish without a trace, and the only thing connecting them is a single cursed name deep in the Appalachian Mountains. There existed a family so twisted by their own obsession with purity that they became something less than human. The Browning family. For over a century, they moved through America like a plague, leaving behind shallow graves, missing children, and a legacy so disturbing that even today, entire towns refuse to speak their name aloud. What you're about to hear isn't folklore, it's documented, it's real, and it's far more horrifying than any legend could ever be. This is the story of America's most disturbing family secret, a bloodline that defied death itself through an unthinkable method, endless repetition. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something. This isn't just history, because in the forests of Washington, the swamps of Florida, and the hollows of Kentucky, some say the Browning children are still out there, still watching, still waiting. The year is 1873. A doctor rides his horse through the mist-covered mountains of eastern Tennessee, called to attend to a family he's heard whispered about, but never seen, the Brownings. His medical bag bounces against the horse's flank as he climbs higher, the trees growing thicker, the sunlight fading even though it's only midday. When he finally reaches the homestead, what he finds makes his blood run cold. The cabin sits in a hollow where the sun never seems to penetrate. The windows are covered not with curtains, but with cloth so thick it's as if the family is hiding from daylight itself. And when the door opens, the doctor sees faces that will haunt him for the rest of his short life. Pale, gaunt, eyes too close together, children with jaws twisted at unnatural angles, limbs that don't quite match, skin so translucent you can see the veins beneath like a roadmap of contaminated blood. The doctor examines them, his hands trembling. He writes in his journal that night, a journal that won't be discovered until over a century later, tucked away in a county archive. There is something unnatural here, a weakness in the body. But more than that, 3 weeks later, the doctor vanishes while traveling the ridge. His horse returns alone, saddle empty, reins trailing in the dirt. His body is never found, but in that hollow, in that cursed house where daylight fears to tread, the Browning family continues, growing, multiplying, keeping their blood folded inward, generation after generation. And this is only the beginning. Let me take you back even further to understand the horror of what the Brownings became. You need to understand where they started. Census records from the late 1800s show clusters of Brownings scattered across eastern Kentucky, in places with names like Breathitt County and Perry County. Mountain folk, isolated, suspicious of outsiders. But there was something else, something the neighbors whispered about, but never said directly. The Brownings didn't marry outside their family, ever. They called it tradition. They called it keeping the bloodline pure. But what it really was a slow-motion catastrophe, written in the bones and faces of every child born into that cursed name. By the 1920s, doctors in nearby towns were quietly documenting a pattern. Browning children arrived at their offices with deformities that shouldn't exist in nature. Crooked jaws, sunken eyes, spines that curved like question marks. Some couldn't walk, others couldn't speak. Their skin had a pallor that looked less like life and more like something preserved in formaldehyde. One physician, in a letter never meant to see daylight, wrote, "I have treated Browning children whose bones appear as if softened, whose skin is too pale for the living. Their kin calls it a family trait. I call it an illness of the blood." But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The Brownings didn't just accept these deformities, they hid them. Families rarely brought their children into town. When neighbors glimpsed them, it was only at dusk, wandering barefoot along dirt roads, their faces covered with cloth, their movements jerking and uncoordinated, as if their bodies were puppets operated by inexperienced hands. And then there were the stories, the hollow-born children. The locals called them children too malformed to walk among normal people, raised in shadow, never to be seen under the sun. In Kentucky, these stories didn't feel like folklore, they felt like warnings. In 1947, a midwife was called to a Browning cabin high in the mountains. Years later, on her deathbed, she confessed to a preacher what she had delivered that night: an infant with no eyes, just skin stretched smooth where the sockets should have been. The preacher begged her never to speak of it again. Within months, the midwife disappeared from the area entirely. No one ever saw her again. This was the root, the poisoned soil from which the Browning curse would spread across America like a cancer. State by state, decade by decade, leaving behind a trail of disappearances and a question that still echoes through the Appalachian hollows. How many children did they take? How many graves lie hidden in those mountains? Now here's where the story takes a turn that will make you question everything you think you know about this family. Because the Brownings didn't stay in Kentucky, they moved. And everywhere they went, the pattern repeated. Tennessee, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Texas, Washington State, Missouri. In each location, the same whispers emerged. Pale families arriving without explanation, children who never attended school, disappearances that local authorities quietly swept under the rug, and always that name, Browning. Let me tell you about Fairfield County, Ohio, 1923. A family of 5 vanishes from their homestead, food still rotting on the table, doors left open, no signs of robbery, no footprints leading away, just an unnatural stillness that made even the hardest sheriffs uncomfortable. Search parties scoured the woods. What they found didn't make sense. Children's clothes, torn and muddy, hidden in the hollow of a tree, not scattered by wind or animals, but placed there deliberately, carefully. 10 years later, Another family disappears near Stark County. This time, a farmhand tells authorities he saw a strange wagon passing on the back road at night. The riders were unlike anyone he'd seen, silent, pale, watchful. Their faces seemed to blur in the lantern light, as if they weren't quite solid, weren't quite real. No one believed him. They called it fear talking. But here's what they found in the Browning family's hidden papers years later. References to the Ohio kin, a phrase that suggested branches of the bloodline had moved, settled temporarily, blended in just long enough before another set of disappearances shadowed their presence. The pattern was undeniable. They weren't just a family, they were a network, a conspiracy written in blood and silence, spreading across state lines like a virus that authorities either couldn't track or chose not to see. And then there was Chief, Florida, 1980s, the swamp country where Spanish moss hangs low and the air is thick with decay. Old-timers in Levy County spoke of a settlement on the swamp's edge, hidden, half-built from rotting wood and sinking stilts. No records placed it on any map, yet hunters and fishermen swore they stumbled across it when the fog grew too thick. What they described was less a home and more a colony, cabins sagging into the marsh, strange wooden idols carved from cypress trunks, circles of stones blackened by fire, and the people, gaunt faces with sunken eyes, features repeating as though copied generation after generation, children running barefoot through the muck, their laughter hollow, their movements jerky and mechanical. At night, witnesses claimed they could hear singing across the water, low droning chants in no language anyone recognized. And when a drifter was taken in by the family in 1951, given food and shelter, he quickly realized their kindness was a trap. He described being forced to sit at a long wooden table where every face stared at him silently, their eyes gleaming in the lamplight. The food was boiled roots and unrecognizable meat, and the eldest man, gaunt with a milky film over his eyes, spoke just once. "Blood must stay. Outsiders feed it." The drifter escaped into the swamp under cover of darkness, half-starved and delirious. When he was found days later near a highway, his story was dismissed as madness, but his descriptions matched the whispers passed down in Levy County for decades. "Blood must stay. Outsiders feed it." That phrase would appear again and again and again. In Missouri, in Washington, in Kentucky, always the same words, like a family motto passed down like twisted scripture. But here's the question that changes everything, the revelation that will make you see this entire story differently. What if the Brownings weren't just hiding from society? What if they were hunting? Let me take you to Cleveland, Texas, 1998. Two young women disappear from the outskirts of Sam Houston National Forest. Their car is found on a dirt logging road, doors unlocked, headlights still on, but the women are never seen again. Deputies search the forest with dogs and helicopters. What they find sends chills through even the most seasoned investigators. Crude shacks hidden in the pines, made of scavenged tin and wood. Inside, animal bones strung from rafters, jars of cloudy liquid, old quilts so filthy they disintegrate when touched, and on one wall a word carved repeatedly into the wood. Pure. The shacks are abandoned, but there are signs of recent habitation. Ashes still warm in a fire pit, footprints leading deeper into the woods. Officially, no link is ever proven between the missing women and the shacks, but off the record, one deputy admits those weren't just squatters. It looked like a clan. For decades, residents of Cleveland had quietly spoken about the family in the forest. They said they were descendants of mountain clans, families that left the Appalachians generations ago and carried their old ways south. Families obsessed with bloodline, secrecy, and survival away from outsiders. And then, the disappearances in Ohio's foster system. Early 1980s, orphanages overcrowded, social workers overwhelmed, records incomplete. And in this chaos, the Browning name began appearing, always on the margins, always just enough to vanish before questions were asked. In 1981, a foster home in rural Muskingum County filed reports of a visiting family that regularly came to help with chores. They weren't staff, they weren't volunteers on record, yet somehow they had access. The children described them as pale people who brought food but asked strange questions, always about their parents, their bloodlines, whether they had siblings. Within months, 3 of the children placed in that home had gone missing. The official report lists them as runaways, but one surviving boy later told investigators he had woken in the night to hear chanting in the cellar. Peering through a crack in the floorboards, he swore he saw a circle of figures holding hands, the children in the center. When the figures noticed him, he pretended to be asleep. By morning, the cellar was empty, and so were the bunks of the 3 missing children. The files went missing. The orphanage shut down within 2 years, but through requests for forgotten case notes, fragments surfaced. In one document, a social worker scribbled a line: "The Browning family knows how to move between the cracks. They adopt without papers. They foster without names. They weren't just hiding children, they were collecting them, using society's blind spots as their hunting ground." Now let me tell you about Missouri, 1994, because this is where the horror becomes undeniable. This is where whispers turn into evidence, stamped with black ink that reads, "Sealed by court order." A sheriff's deputy breaks into an abandoned farmstead, expecting to find a meth lab. What he finds is something closer to a laboratory for the damned. The basement is arranged with crude wooden tables, lit by lanterns wired into a generator. Jars line the shelves, jars containing preserved organs of unknown origin. Some are small, unmistakably human. Others are too malformed to identify. Then there are the records, faded composition notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. One line appears again and again: "The blood must be kept pure, defects must be corrected." And the sketches, crude drawings on yellowed paper, showing children bound to chairs, wires attached to their heads. One sketch depicts a child with facial deformities, eyes uneven, jaw twisted. Next to it, a note: "She is unfit for the surface." Federal agents seize the farmstead within days. The Browning family disappears. No charges, no trial. The notebooks, organs, and sketches are removed, boxed and sealed. The sheriff who filed the initial report retires soon after, refusing interviews. His only public statement is short and bitter. "There are things families do behind closed doors that should never see the light of day." The Brownings weren't hiding secrets, they were breeding them. This wasn't just inbreeding anymore. This was something darker: experimentation, control, an obsession with perfection that had crossed into the realm of the monstrous. But here's what the official reports don't tell you. Here's what was buried in those sealed documents that only surfaced decades later through leaked testimony. The experiments weren't random, they were systematic. The Brownings had been documenting their bloodline for generations, tracking every birth defect, every deformity, every deviation from what they considered pure. And they were trying to correct it, not through modern medicine, not through genetic counseling, but through their own twisted science. Isolation chambers where children were kept in darkness for months. Crude surgical procedures performed without anesthesia. Dietary restrictions designed to alter growth patterns. And something even more disturbing: attempts to merge bloodlines in ways that violated every natural law. One recovered notebook contained a passage that forensic psychologists still study today. "The blood remembers. When we fold it back upon itself enough times, the mistakes will disappear. The weak will become strong. The broken will become whole." We are not destroying our children, we are perfecting them. This is the mind of true obsession. This is what happens when isolation meets delusion, meets an unshakable belief that the rest of humanity is contaminated. And only through absolute control can purity be achieved. The Brownings didn't see themselves as criminals or even as outcasts. They saw themselves as guardians, protectors of something sacred that the modern world wanted to destroy. And then came Washington State, the final known refuge, the dense rain-soaked forests where the Browning lineage would perfect their ultimate method. Not just genetic replication, but behavioral repetition so precise it bordered on the supernatural. By the late 1990s, fragments of the family had drifted westward, and in the towns bordering the Cascade Mountains, people began noticing something impossible. Children with mirrored features appearing in public spaces, performing identical tasks, then vanishing without explanation. But it wasn't just their appearance, it was their behavior. A teacher described a boy arranging pencils exactly as she had seen months earlier. In a classroom in Tennessee, a retired logger spoke of a man walking the same route through thick evergreens, pausing at exact intervals, every step mirroring movements he had seen in suppressed Appalachian footage. Neighbors who tried to speak to the family reported conversations that looped, phrases repeated with unnatural accuracy, pauses identical, expressions mirrored, as though the individual were reliving someone else's memory in real time. Hikers reported seeing children moving through the trees, always in pairs, performing tasks with meticulous symmetry. One man described a fleeting moment: two small figures digging shallow trenches, removing roots and rocks, then leaving them arranged identically to a site he had read about in Kentucky archives. The echoes spanned time, geography, and memory. Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Washington, all linked through a single unbroken line of repetition. Scholars reviewing isolated fragments of journal entries, field notes, and eyewitness accounts concluded something unprecedented. The Browning lineage had achieved a living mirror, a propagation of identity through replication rather than traditional inheritance. They weren't just surviving, they were echoing themselves across space and time, creating copies of copies, each generation performing the exact same rituals, gestures, and movements as their ancestors, as if the family had discovered a way to cheat death itself, not through immortality, but through endless repetition. By the early 2000s, sightings diminished. The dense Washington forests grew eerily quiet, but the lingering patterns persisted in archives, in anecdotal accounts, in whispered memories that refused to fade. And here's what keeps me awake at night. Here's the question that has no answer. Where are they now? Because here's the thing about the Browning family: they were never caught, never prosecuted, never stopped. Every investigation ended abruptly. Every trail went cold. Every witness either vanished or fell silent. The farmhouses were burned, the shacks demolished, the graves sealed off, but no bodies were ever recovered. No members of the family were ever arrested. They simply disappeared into the American landscape, as if they had never existed at all. Except they did exist. The documents prove it. The testimonies prove it. The shallow graves and missing children prove it. And the pattern proves it. A pattern that spanned over a century, crossing state lines, adapting to new environments, always one step ahead of the law. Some say they're still out there, still moving through the forests and swamps and forgotten hollows of America, still collecting children who wander too far from home, still performing their rituals in clearings where no birds sing and no animals nest. Others say they've evolved, that they've learned to hide in plain sight, working in foster systems, blending into small towns, watching, waiting, repeating. And maybe that's the most terrifying possibility of all, that the Browning family isn't a relic of the past, but a present-day horror we simply choose not to see. That somewhere, right now, in a cabin deep in the woods or a farmhouse on the outskirts of a forgotten town, pale-faced children are being raised in silence, being taught to repeat, being prepared to continue a bloodline that should have died out generations ago. but instead learned to survive through the one thing humanity fears most, becoming an echo of itself, trapped in an endless loop of inherited madness. But let me tell you something that hasn't been widely reported, something that emerged only recently from digital archives and cold case databases that have been digitized in the last decade. When researchers began cross-referencing missing persons reports across multiple states, they discovered something chilling. The disappearances attributed to the Browning family, or families matching their description, weren't random acts of violence or opportunistic abductions. They followed a calendar. Every 7 years, like clockwork, clusters of missing children would appear in reports across 3 or 4 states simultaneously, always in rural areas, always near forests or waterways, always children between the ages of 8 and 14. The pattern stretched back to the 1880s and continued, unbroken, into the late 1990s. What does this mean? Criminologists who've studied the pattern off the record suggest it points to something ritualistic, something planned, as if the Browning family operated on a cycle, a generational clock that dictated when they needed to expand their bloodline with fresh genetic material from the outside world, the very thing they claimed to despise. They also desperately needed to survive. And here's the truly disturbing part. When DNA technology became sophisticated enough to test remains found in unmarked graves across Appalachia, forensic teams discovered something impossible to explain. Some of the remains, buried decades apart in locations hundreds of miles from each other, shared genetic markers so similar they could have been siblings. But the burial dates made that impossible, unless the Brownings had perfected something beyond behavioral repetition, unless they had found a way to ensure that their children, born generations apart, were genetically nearly identical. Think about what that means, not just inbreeding, but controlled, methodical, genetic replication spanning over a century, a biological echo chamber so precise that great-great-grandchildren emerged as virtual clones of their ancestors. Scientists who reviewed the classified findings could only describe it as unprecedented genetic bottlenecking, with seemingly intentional preservation of specific traits. The Brownings weren't just obsessed with purity. They were attempting something that bordered on selective evolution, using methods we still don't fully understand. And the terrifying question remains, did they succeed? The Browning story ends not with closure, but with the uneasy realization that some legacies cannot be buried, erased, or forgotten. Across the Appalachian hollows, the plains of Florida, and the forests of Washington, a line of uncanny repetition may still continue to ripple, a chilling testament to what happens when humanity and obsession intertwine. Blood must stay. Outsiders feed it. Those words, carved into wood, scribbled in journals, and whispered in the dark, remain the final testament of a family that defied every natural law A family that turned isolation into armor and repetition into immortality. And if you listen closely enough, in the right places, at the right time, you might still hear them. The hollow laughter of children who look too much alike, the rhythmic chanting that carries no meaning but demands to be heard, the footsteps that follow the exact same path, night after night, year after year, generation after generation, because the Brownings understood something most of us refuse to accept, that the past never truly dies. It just repeats endlessly, perfectly, horrifyingly. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real curse. Not the inbreeding, not the disappearances, but the knowledge that somewhere in the darkest corners of America, history is still repeating itself and will continue to repeat itself forever. The most disturbing part, the internet has theories. Modern-day researchers who spent years tracking missing persons cases have noticed something strange. Clusters of disappearances in rural areas, always following similar patterns, always near forests or swamps, always children or young adults with no family connections. And when you map these disappearances over the last 20 years, they form a trail, a wandering, purposeful trail that winds through the same states where the Brownings once lived. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, maybe the Brownings are still teaching their children the old ways. Maybe they're still out there, moving quietly through the margins of American society, collecting what they need, erasing evidence, and disappearing before anyone can connect the dots. Because if there's one thing this family proved over and over again, it's that they know how to survive, and they know how to hide. If this story shocked you, disturbed you, or made you question what's really hiding in the forgotten places of America, then you need to see what I've uncovered next. Check the video on your screen now. I believe it was made for you, because some stories are too terrifying to be told just once, and some truths demand to be repeated, just like the Brownings. The story ends not with answers, but with the unsettling comfort of knowing it's just a tale told in the dark. Yet the best horror stories work because they tap into something real. Our fear of isolation, of what happens when communities turn inward, of the secrets that might hide in forgotten places. In the mythology I've created here, the Brownings represent something primal, the terror of erasure, of becoming so removed from society that you become its shadow. They're the embodiment of what we fear might exist in the margins, not because it's real, but because it feels like it could be. And isn't that what makes a story truly haunting? Not the facts, but the feeling, the way it makes you look twice at an abandoned farmhouse on a back road, the way it makes you wonder about the families you never see, living just beyond the tree line. The Brownings aren't real, but the forests are, the isolated hollows are, the abandoned homesteads, slowly sinking into the earth, are real. And sometimes, when you're driving through those forgotten places at dusk, when the mist rolls in and the trees close overhead, You might find yourself thinking about this story, about pale faces in windows, about footsteps that echo their ancestors, about bloodlines that refuse to end. You might catch yourself speeding up, just a little, checking your rear-view mirror more often, and when you finally reach civilization, bright lights, crowded streets, the comfortable noise of normal life, you'll feel relief wash over you, because deep down, we all know the truth. The best horror stories are the ones that make us grateful. They're not real, the ones that let us experience terror from the safety of our screens and pages, the ones that remind us how thin the line is between the world we know and the darkness we imagine. The Brownings live only in these words, in this story, in your imagination. They're as real as you allow them to be, and maybe that's the most unsettling thought of all. That the truly terrifying things aren't the ones that exist in the world, but the ones we create in our minds and pass along in whispers. So sleep well tonight, lock your doors, not because you have to, but because it makes you feel better. And if you hear something outside your window, remind yourself, it's just the wind, just branches scraping, just your imagination running wild with a story someone made up to entertain you. Just a story, nothing more.